This is Benjamin Solitaire with the Civic Engagement Commission. Welcome to tonight's presentation from the Independent Budget Office on City Budget Basics. Quick couple of things about the CEC, and I'll pass it off to our presenters. Civic Engagement Commission, as I think many of you know, hopefully, was voted into existence in 2018 as a city charter referendum. So if you voted in that election and voted for us, thank you very much. I now have a job because of you, so appreciate that. We have several program lanes that we focus on. Obviously, providing community board trainings to all of you across the city is one of them. We try to help with information about the city budget. We're doing disability awareness and etiquette coming up, and parliamentary procedures this year. We've also done fair housing and affordable housing workshops. And a variety of others, and we'll be announcing the fall, the winter, spring workshops in the coming weeks. So thank you, and it's always a pleasure. We try to work answer whatever questions we can for community boards. I served on one for several years before I went to work for the city council, but I was on CB6 in Brooklyn, and it's a fantastic work that you folks do. We also provide language translation assistance, interpretation assistance at poll sites around the city for elections, both early voting and the day of. We provide interpretation in languages other than what the BOE provides. So we want to make sure that everybody can have access to the right to vote, regardless of language. We also do voter turnout, voter education. We are dedicated, our DNYC, Democracy NYC, is housed here, and they are dedicated to stopping the drop, which means getting more people to come out and vote. I think you probably all know we have dismal voting turnout in the city, and this election coming up on November 7th, mostly city council and some judges, so it's probably going to be pretty low, but we still need people to get out to vote and to show they care about their communities. And then one of our bigger programs, of course, is participatory budgeting. We call it the People's Money here. It's the first city-wide PB process in the city. It's been in the city council for about 13 years. This is the 13th year. But last year, we started, again, the first citywide process where everybody in the city has a right to offer up their ideas on how to spend part of the city budget. And then in the spring, after we have looked at all those ideas and developed a ballot with the help of other city residents, borough residents, everybody in the city gets to vote on how that money gets spent in their communities. It's really an amazing process. The People's Money. I will put a link for that into the chat a little later on. I'll also put a link to all our coming workshops, so you can register for anything in the future that you want. And that is about all I have to say, so we can pass it off to the reason you are here tonight. But thank you again for coming, and I will pass it, I guess, to Logan to kick us off. Logan Clark and Julia Conrad are our presenters for tonight, and I look forward to hearing what they have to say.
Hey, folks. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. And thank you for that nice introduction, Benjamin. It's one of these things where I cast a vote in 2018, and I didn't realize that I would be sitting here, 5 years later, dealing with the consequences of that. So
that's right.
I really want to thank the folks over at the CEC for putting on these presentations. These are a really great way, not just for people to learn about the budget, but for us over at the IBO to learn about the communities that we serve. So we really like giving this roadshow, and it is a hoot for us. So and with that, I'm actually going to pass it over to our newly appointed, very fantastic Assistant Director for Education, Julia Conrad.
Hi, I'm Julia Conrad, and as Logan said, I'm the Assistant Director for Education, and I will be speaking a little bit later in the presentation more about the background on IBO. So Logan, you can start us off, but so great to be here, and thank you all.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here just momentarily, as soon as I remember how to do this on one screen with Zoom. And it looks like we're good, and I'm going to go ahead and hit from the beginning. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hide that. And it looks like we are good. So tonight we are going to do a 101 on the New York City budget. You can stop me or Julia at absolutely any point in time in this presentation. There's a lot of stuff in here that may be familiar to you, but it might not be familiar to you. So this is really for your understanding. So please do stop us if anything is unclear. If I say something that's just complete alphabet soup, like, you know, OTPSPS, such and such, please do stop me. I will try not to speak in acronyms because that's the worst to hear from government people, but it may slip in every once in a while. And I apologize in advance if I slip up over any words. As I was telling Benjamin and Julia earlier, I've been up since 5 o'clock in the morning with cats and an 8-month-old. So it's been a ride today. So, but we're going to go ahead and start by going over some city budget basics. And so within here, we're just really going to talk about the sort of flow of the budget, who the main players are, and how all of those folks interact with each other. And so we're going to go ahead and we'll go from here. And so budgets are a public document that forecasts the amount of money that a government will receive and spend in a period of time, which is normally a year. And so this is important to sort of note, just because, you know, we always sort of want to figure out what we're talking about. Some states do a budget every other year. Some states do it every year. Some cities change that up. So it really depends on your locality. But what budgets convey is what those policy decisions are, and they reflect certain priorities of various players, whether that be the mayoralty or city council. And so one of the things that we like to highlight here is that when we're talking about what people value, if you're not putting any money behind it, you probably don't value it too much. So if you're taking a look at the city budget and you see something and it's like, oh, the mayor says that he wants to do X, Y, Z, and there's no funding for X, Y, Z, he probably doesn't care about it too much. So it's one of these things that, you know, budgets themselves are a statement of values. And so when you hear people talk about it, they might say it's a document of our values, it's a moral document, those types of things. It's because if you don't put money behind your priorities, you're probably not actually making them priorities. So that's something to sort of keep in mind. And what budgets are is they are a blueprint for how we will spend our money or expenditures, how much the city will receive or revenues, and where we will receive those revenues from, and how they will be balanced. And so I'm not sure how many of you were around in 1976, or if any of you have cracked the history book on the city of New York, but you may remember from either your own experience or from that book, Ford to NYC dropped dead, which was the big headline during the fiscal crisis of the 1970s. And one of the primary results of that fiscal crisis was that the city now has to have absolutely a balanced general fund every fiscal year. And what that means is that our revenues and our expenditures need to match exactly. And so we're not allowed to carry surplus, but we're also not allowed to have deficit. And so where this tends to happen or create difficulties is when we have things like surplus. Where do you put your surplus? And that's a common sort of thread. What we're going to be talking about tonight is, you know, how the city uses its operating surplus to go forward with various other priorities. And so we're just going to talk about how the city actually budgets. And so there are 4 financial plans within the fiscal year. And the fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. And so you'll tend to hear a lot of news, you know, right after school gets out, everybody's getting ready for the summer. And then that's when the mayor and the city council are working together to pass the adopted budget. And so that happens in June. And so that's right around here. And what that does is it finalizes the fiscal year that is passing, and then adds council initiatives and basically sets up the initial budget for the upcoming year. And so, hold on one second. Let me Is there a way for me to dock this elsewhere? I don't want to dock that either. Okay. But as we sort of go through this, there are various plans that we go through to modify that adopted budget. And so right now we're actually coming up on our first quarter plan, which is basically a progress report on the current fiscal year. And so this is the first crack at the apple, as it were. And so this is the first chance for agencies to put in new need initiatives, move funding around, or, as the case may be, they may be told to cut the budget. So a PEG letter came out in early September, and that's a program to eliminate the gap. And so that was the administration essentially asking all of the agencies to submit 5% cuts for the next 3 plans. So in November, January, and April, they're expected to be cutting 5% of their budgets each time. So it's a substantial hit. So that's where we have the November plan. The next budget that pops up is the January or preliminary budget. And what's really important about the January budget is that's the first time that we actually bring the next fiscal year into balance. And so when we talk about fiscal years, we have the current fiscal year, and then we have what are called the out years. And so right now we're in fiscal year 2024. And then next year will be fiscal year 2025, obviously. And that's the first out year. And then you'll also have out years 2, 3, and 4. And so if you recall, we were talking about the balance or the budget needing to be balanced. You're allowed to have an off-balance budget as long as it is in one of the out years. But during the January plan, you actually need to have that first out year fully balanced. And so that's something that the administration will be doing, is trying to bring the next fiscal year into balance. The next plan is the executive budget, which happens in April. And the important thing to sort of be on the lookout for during the executive budget is what's happening in the state budget. And that's the reason why we have the executive budget is the city gets a large amount of its revenues from the state. And so, we're looking at roughly 17 billion this upcoming year. And so what we really need to be able to do is make changes based upon what the state is actually going to be giving us. So the executive budget is there for that. And then, we close out a fiscal year and start the next one with the adopted budget. So, and currently we're right here, as I was saying earlier. And IBO releases a report for the November plan, the January plan, and the April plans. And so this is charter mandated. So we produce these every year. You can always sort of count on us to be putting these out. And so essentially what happens is OMB releases their budget, and then we create a response to it. So right after OMB releases their budget, we're going to have to do our work and start doing our analysis and our independent forecasts. So let's just talk real quickly about primary budget actors in the city. And so first, we have the mayoralty and the Office of Management Budget, or OMB. And the mayor and OMB together draft and propose financial plans to city council. And then they also manage the city budget and oversee agency activities. So a lot of times over at OMB, they spend a lot of time on the B in their acronym on the budget side, but they're also very much a managing agency. And so they approve staffing plans, hires, promotions, and also the moving of funds around. And so that's one of these things that they need to, that they are responsible for, and the mayor is responsible for, leading up all of his agencies. Next primary budget actor is City Council. They negotiate with the mayor and then approve the budget before June 30th. They also hold public hearings to scrutinize and understand the financial plans. They also essentially vote and approve every single modification. So for the November plan, they need to vote to approve that. Same thing with the January plan or the executive plan. Now they can actually not vote on something, or they can vote something down. But if they don't vote on something, it automatically essentially passes into law, or not really law, but it becomes approved automatically. And so it's one of these things where, you know, we talk about sort of who holds power within the budget. If city council needs to actively vote something down, as opposed to just not take something up, that means that they've got a little bit less power over those things than the mayoralty does. So the mayor, we tend to have a very strong mayoral system here in New York City. So the next actor is the comptroller, and the comptroller audits actual spending and compiles the annual comprehensive financial report, or the ACFR. We call it the ACT for ease of use. And that's actually going to be coming out here in the next couple of weeks. And it's a really good document to look back at the city's spending of the previous year. And now I will say it's not necessarily the most readable or comprehensible document in the world. But the comptroller has started releasing what's called the popular annual financial report. And also there is a release of all of the documents, or all of the spreadsheets in there, within Excel or CSV files. So if you want to play around with them yourself, if you feel like you're comfortable with that, you can. So it's an interesting document to read if you like reading financial statements, which, you know, I know all of us like a little bit of light beach reading. The next actor is the Financial Control Board. And if we think back to the financial crisis of 1976, what came out of that was also the Financial Control Board, which is a state actor that has review and oversight with respect to the financial management of New York City. They were actually in charge of our budget for about 12 years, I want to say, if I've got my dates right. And now, since the early 90s and late 80s, they've basically been in a sunset period. And so in order for them to take full control over the city budget again, something would have to go spectacularly wrong. And so sometimes people talk about like, oh, well, what if the Financial Control Board comes along? And really, it would have to be approved by the state. Something would have to go desperately, desperately wrong. And what I will say is, you know, we've been through various recessions, the Great Recession, we've been through COVID, we've been through Sandy, and none of those have triggered the Financial Control Board coming back online. So we're talking something very big, very massive, and likely to be caught before it got that bad in terms of financial management. So that's just, you know, it's they're not an actor, but the idea that they would just swoop in is a little bit pie in the sky for some folks. And then finally, we have us, the Independent Budget Office, and we independently analyze the budget and policy decisions of New York City. And Julia's going to go into this a little bit later, but we are an independent, nonpartisan, non-mayoral city agency. And so we are not a nonprofit. We are funded by your tax dollars. And so our role is to basically give you the straight facts on the budget, because the other sort of side of this is budgets aren't just implementation documents, but they're also public relations documents and statements of values. And so they're not always, and they're conservative by nature, in that, you know, the OMB has the job of making sure that the city can turn its lights on. But sometimes that means that, you know, they might say that they have a little bit less money, or that they're going to spend a little bit more than they actually are going to. So it's our job to sort of cut through that and really get to an independent forecast that's outside of this the political process. And so let's talk real quick about avenues for budget input, which I know is of big importance to community boards. I know that a lot of you are going through your district needs assessment right now. So we just sort of want to talk about how people can impact the budget or affect the budget and get things moving in the direction that they'd like. So year-round, anyone can give public comment at council hearings. And so these occur after every financial plan, and more specific hearings happen after the January and April plans. But, you know, the city council is always having public hearings. They're bringing people in. There might be testimony from the administration, but generally after the administration, they are open to the public. And so you're always welcome to be giving comments at those hearings. You're also able to talk to your council representative, and council is always, again, raising issues with the mayor throughout the year. Primarily, they're really it's sort of in the trenches, hashing out the budget in June and late May. That's sort of when they are really at their most active with regards to the budget, but they have to do a lot of it throughout the year. There's also the public advocate, and so there's no direct budget power, but there is political influence. People like to say he has a bully pulpit. That's really tough to say after a little while. But yeah, there's political influence, and the public advocate is essentially able to sort of shine a light on issues that may be of interest to the public, and is able to speak about them. You're also able to reach out to the mayoral administration. There are a lot of agencies that hold public hearings. The Department of Parks and Recreation has borough chiefs, and they will hold public hearings on parks, talk to community boards. DOT does a lot of similar things. I've been to community board meetings where DOT is there presenting on items. And so you really can talk to the actual administration themselves. And that's sort of in some smaller ways, and in terms of the policies that directly affect your community. And then by mid-February, as you're all are working on your district needs assessment, those get sent over to the Office of Management and Budget in mid-January, mid-February, and they have to respond to that. And so this is not to say that they need to fund absolutely everything that the community boards are asking for, but these are issues that get raised, and then it is on the administration to either sort of accept, do something about it, or to say thanks but no thanks. We're not going to really take that on at this point in time. So it is something that you can do. It's something that I feel like a lot of people really focus on. It's definitely it can be tough getting a project through, but I think one of the things that's really sort of important to think about is, if you've got something down on paper, you can say, hey, the administration hasn't gotten back to us. And then, you talk to more folks, your council representative, your public advocates. You can build coalitions around these things. So it's a useful process in terms of getting an ask on the table and really starting getting the ball moving. So. And then by early March, Borough Presidents are out there reallocating capital funds for their borough. And so this is something that they do each and every year. They all have allocations. And so a lot of community groups are sort of vying for those funds. But that's definitely something where you can be in contact with your BPs about. And so we are going to switch over from budget process to just talking about what's in the current fiscal year's budget. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to look at OMB's gap sheets, and this will sort of tell us, where OMB sees the current fiscal year, where they see the out years, and how that is going to play out for them. So let's go ahead. And also, we can go ahead and stop for a quick second if anyone has questions. I think I haven't seen any in the chat, but if folks have questions right now, we can stop for a quick second. Great. Okay. Well, if no one has any questions, we'll just go ahead and jump right into it and start talking about what's in the budget. What are we spending on? So first thing is revenue. Where is the money coming from? And so the largest part of the city's budget, roughly 30% or so, is comes from general property taxes. So this is the most important source of funding. It's the most singular source. And then we also have other taxes that come in. And so that's things like income tax, business taxes, sales tax, taxes on cigarettes, alcohol, cannabis now, given the legislation from Albany. And so there's a whole sort of host of other taxes that go in there. The income tax is the second largest next to the property tax. So that's where the vast majority of our funding comes from, is taxes, and so roughly 70% comes from taxes. And then after that, we have a few other items. We've got miscellaneous revenues, and so if any of you have ever paid a parking ticket or a fee to the Department of Buildings, or if you have gotten a membership at a New York City recreation center, all of that is miscellaneous revenue. And so those are dollars that aren't taxes, but tend to be fees, summonses, all sorts of things. And that's something that funds us to about, last year did about 8.5 billion. We'll see where we get this year. I think this is something that we are probably going to revise our forecast up based upon FY23's numbers. But that's something we'll have to talk to our economists about. Unrestricted governmental aid is funds actually from other entities, and so that generally comes from either the feds or the state. And then intra-city revenue is not something that's super important to be taking a look at. It's essentially if one agency sells a service or a good to another agency. So the city actually backs out the dollars that it gets from itself. So it's really just sort of there. There's an equal takedown on the expenditure side as well to even things out. And then there's disallowances against categorical grants. And that's essentially something where, if we say we're going to get money from the feds or the state, but we don't end up having those dollars materialize, we have to make sure that we've got some budget in there to cover that essentially lost revenue. So, this really pops up on like FEMA grants, in disaster recovery grants. Like, we might say, oh, Hurricane Sandy did $10 billion worth of damage, and we would like that amount from you, federal government. The federal government comes back, reviews all their invoices, and they say, you know what? We're actually only going to give you 9 billion out of that 10 billion that you said. So that's something where we'd have to offset those costs throughout the years. And then down here, we also have our categorical grants. So this is just private funding. And then we've got federal grants and then state grants. And then interfund revenues, which are a sort of weird capital funding thing that shows up within the general fund. And so next, let's talk about the expense budget. And so where is our money going to? And so the largest part and growing part of our budget is actually just in personal services. And so this is staff costs. A lot of this is going through salaries and wages. If you were paying attention to the news back in February, March, April, there was really big news around collective bargaining agreements being signed. So DC 37 signs an agreement. The Police Benevolence Association also signs an agreement. And so that's locks in the pattern for the next couple of years. And so that's really a growing cost for the city, is just salaries. And then we also have our pension, and we also see pretty big growth in fringe benefits. And fringe benefits, when we talk about that, we're really talking about healthcare costs for the most part. There's other benefits that are in there, but the main driver is healthcare costs. And then anything that is not those items being spent directly on people is what's called other than personal services. And I know you're saying that's just the most imaginative name that anyone's ever come up with, but it's basically anything that's staffing and anything that's not staffing. So within there, we have a couple of other breakouts, again, things that aren't super useful, but we've got the medical assistance, public assistance, and then everything else. And so the largest part of other than personal services is the everything else side. So this is everything from consultant contracts to the pencils, the printers. If the city is spending money on telephone bills, things of that nature. It's literally everything else. And then down here we've got debt service. So that's everything that we borrow money for. And then, as we were sort of talking about earlier, what do we do with the surplus? That ends up being taken up in these budget stabilization lines. And so, for the past 3-4 years, we've been operating with about a $5 to $6 billion operating budget. And essentially, what we do, I'm sort of, the running joke is that millennials don't have homes. But if any of you have mortgages, essentially what this is we're prepaying the mortgage. And so this will prepay down things like debt. We will prepay our next year's contribution to retiree health benefits. So there's a couple of ways that we can actually spend our surplus. And in doing so, we reduce the next year's obligations. And so the best way to think about it is just prepaying that mortgage, prepaying your credit card, other sorts of debt that you might have. And then we have reserves. And so there's a little bit of ballast that's sort of put in there every single year, about $1.5, $1.4 billion that just is there in case of emergencies. That's not the only reserve fund. We also have a rainy day fund that currently has about $3 billion in it, and then another fund that has about $4 billion. So all told, we've got about $8 billion available for reserves as they currently stand. That might change if we tap into reserves this year, but that's something that we've got available to us. And so last thing I just sort of want to bring to your attention is this gap to be closed. And so right now, as you can sort of see, we have $0 in the gap. So this means that our revenues are exactly equal to our expenditures. For fiscal year 2023, which is the past fiscal year, and fiscal year 2024, which is the current fiscal year. So those are essentially saying, hey, we're closed out. And then when January comes around, we are going to have to bring this $5 billion gap in FY25 down to zero. So that's something that you'll hear the mayor talk about a lot in the coming months. He's got essentially 3 or 4 months to erase a $5 billion gap, find revenues, cut expenditures, but essentially zero out that line. So, and we can go ahead. Yeah.
Logan.
Yeah.
Not to interrupt. Thank you. This is great. I had 2 questions that occurred to me.
Absolutely.
Well, first of all, that gap, that peg to eliminate the gap, as you mentioned, yes, even the CEC, which has a very small budget, though I honestly don't know what it is, to be exact, had to do that. We got that note, cut the budget by 5%, guys, and for the next 3 years. It's a tricky thing. And all our conversations with our fellow agencies are about, are you guys trying to do that now? Like, yes. So, but my question was, you mentioned in the other than personal services,
Yep.
Consultants.
Yes, absolutely.
Now that a couple of years ago, there was a big article about how much we were paying consultants. I worked as a consultant before I became on staff. Is that an appreciable number? And the second part of that is when the city hires, and again, this was a recent article, many nonprofit organizations to carry out their the services that so many New Yorkers get, 35% of the budget, I think. Do those contracts do they qualify as consultant, or is that a personal service?
Yeah, no. So all of the nonprofit providers fall in under this the, like consultant services. Anything that's here in this all other, it's kind of lumped in with everything else. But yeah, it's it is a significant portion. The city really relies on the nonprofit industry to carry water for it often, and the nonprofits don't necessarily have an option sometimes. So it is a really substantial amount of city service that used to be or may have been done at some point in time by direct city workers that now has been essentially sort of outsourced to a nonprofit. And we do that not just with social services, but a lot of this is IT or design services for capital work. It could be something where a city agency is doing some sort of reorganization and they need they'll hire management consultants to bring them in. McKinsey makes a pretty PowerPoint presentation. The city pays them large sums of money year over year to make those presentations. Similarly, we might have, I come from a background in disaster recovery grants over at OMB. And, there's a lot of consultants in that realm as well, just because there's not a lot of know-how on how does the city interact with the federal government in the rules and regulations surrounding that. So, a lot of times there's perfectly good reasons for the city to bring on a consultant. There are other times where, that might be something that we can actually insource. And so there's often, sort of a tension between taking on staff and paying not just their salaries, but also, those pension and fringe benefits and building capacity as opposed to, maybe being able to do a short-term deployment of a consultant and getting something done a little bit faster. And so that's something that, I think the city often has to weigh, and it is definitely, it is not an inconsequential amount of the budget in terms of, our consultant budget. So yeah, it's big. So yeah. And so let's actually focus into FY24 for a quick second. Talk about this $107 billion budget. And it looks like we've got a question from Bernard. Does a not-for-profit receive its money from donations? How does that qualify having your back helping you out, or when they do not work for a profit? So yes, a lot of nonprofits do receive money from donations, but they also take on government contracts, right? And so that might be something where, they're not allowed to, run their business for profit. They have to register as a 501c3 with the IRS. But they are able to take on government work. So that's something that they're able to do. But then they might also be raising other funds for whether that's extra staff, it's their building, they might be raising that through private donations as well. So, all right, so let's go ahead and, go ahead.
Thank you. Question answered. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Bernard. All right, great. Let's go ahead and talk about fiscal year 2024 and where we are right now this year. So, I actually sent one of these over to Benjamin a little bit earlier, and I'll explain some of these categories and who falls into them a little bit more, because this is basically the way that the city and the comptroller break down city agencies and the city budget. And then that's essentially by mayoral cabinet. And that's not really something that, it doesn't relate to a particular mayor. But one of the things that, I've been doing this for about 7 to 8 years now. And when we talk about budgeting, really, we're just talking about taking imaginary beans and putting them in imaginary buckets. And mayoral cabinets are one of the imaginary buckets that we budget our funds in. So it doesn't necessarily, it broadly ties things together, but it's not something that necessarily relates to an organizational structure or anything like that. But if we take a look at this, by far and away, the thing that we spend the most dollars on in every single fiscal year is education. And that is strictly within DOE. And so we're not talking about CUNY. CUNY is all the way down here. But education is, again, far and away the thing that we spend the absolute most on. And that's about 1/3 of the budget. It's certainly one of the largest aspects of our team over here at IBO. Julia has been doing great work on the research side and the budget side. She's going to talk about what we do and some of our work products about that later. But if you do have any questions regarding education, she is absolutely the person you need to talk to. So the next largest thing that we spend money on is social services. And so that's things like the Department of Homeless Services, the Human Resources Administration, or HRA, or Department of Social Services. And so that's a rather large chunk of our budget. A lot of that is in staff, but it's also in and payments that we put out to people. The next largest is the miscellaneous budget. And this trips up a lot of people because when we talk about the miscellaneous budget, people are like, there's just $17 million or $17 billion in the miscellaneous budget. And really what this is fringe costs, and it's those healthcare costs that we were talking about earlier. There's also parts of this that are actually going to be split out relatively soon, but the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice Reform is located within the miscellaneous budget by some accident of history, but they will be moved over into the public safety and judicial bucket relatively soon. And next, we've got the public safety and judicial budget, and that's the police department, the fire department, corrections, I think the Department of Emergency Management. I could be wrong; they might be in general government, but that's just sort of the flavors that you've got here. And then next, we've got pension. General government covers a lot of things, but that's DCAS, the Department of Citywide Administrative Services. It's the mayoralty, anything having to do with education, or sorry, elections, not education. And then we've got the health, environmental protection, debt service, housing, and so on and so forth, sort of all the way down the line. And so if you ever have any questions about any of those, we'd be more than happy to take questions on them. But I think after that, we are going to get into our role, and I will be passing this off to Julia. So if folks have any questions, maybe we can take some now. Also, I apologize for my cat that's been popping up. So,
I will jump in with another question.
Yeah.
Bernard, you go first. I can ask anytime. Why don't you go? If your hand is up right now.
In that general government section, I'm a disabled veteran. I don't see anything in the budget as far as expense for veteran services. When it says general government, would that be included as far as veterans are concerned?
I forget if the Department of Veteran Services is within general government or they're in health or social services. They are definitely within one of these buckets. I used to work right next to the person that handled their budget, but I honestly forget which of these buckets it's in. And so I can definitely get back to you on that. But if you want to go ahead, I will shoot you a message after Julia takes over, and I'll look that up for you.
Thank you. Community Board 7, Bronx, New York.
There we go. Hearing from the boogie down tonight.
Yeah.
My question is about food stamps, because food stamps are a federally funded program.
Yes.
They go through our budget. They're also unlimited, right? There's no, they've matched the need, if I understand. So is the actual, we obviously administer them, so that's a lot of cost on our side in HRA. Is the budget for food stamps themselves part of our budget?
I would need to check in with our social services person on that. And I can definitely get back to you on that. I forget if it's a pass-through or if we essentially set people up with the federal government and the feds take it from there.
Okay.
I'll have to double check with our social services person, but there are arrangements like that where, even if it's a program that we help administer, it might not flow through our budget outside of, the staff that are actually doing it.
Okay.
And so it might be something where that's held outside. Food stamps are a pretty substantial expense. And so if I recall, I think it might be more of the, hey, we're going to set people up with with the feds rather than a pass-through. So,
okay.
But I will confirm that with our social services team.
Cool. And I should have said SNAP, which of course is the new name. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I guess.
And also, truly, I know an awful little about an awful lot in the city budget. So hopefully I can answer your questions. But if not, I can follow up with my colleagues and we can definitely get you an answer. I'll go ahead and I'll chat you my email, and folks can go ahead and reach out to me. I'll make sure that we get you in touch with the right person. So,
There is another question in the chat.
all right.
It says,
Why
Latrice,
why is the housing budget so small, given that it's been a pressing matter and has been for decades? That's a question on everybody's mind. I think that that's something that you know, we would really need to take a long time to sort of delve into. You know, there's a lot of history behind how much the federal government funds housing, how much the state funds it, and then how much the city funds it, and you know what the role of government is in procuring housing for its residents. It's a pretty substantial question. I think it might be something. I'm not the housing expert, so that might be one of these things where I turn back and ask our housing team. But it's definitely something where, you know, I think if you ask different people, you'll probably get different answers depending on where they sit. And so it might be something where if you ask HPD, they'll be like, oh, well, you know what? It's because we're getting crowded out by other agencies, or you know, it hasn't been. I would love more budget, but we haven't been able to get it through council, or something along those lines. But it's the other thing that pops up is and thank you for my colleagues for sending me a message on it. There's also when we talk about this, we're also just looking at the expense budget, and there's substantial capital funding outside of the expense budget. And so today we're just talking about expense, but there are capital dollars that go towards this too. And when we talk about expense versus capital, the easiest way to think about it is expense is, you know, your debit card or any cash that you have on hand, whereas the capital budget is like your credit card. And so the city actually borrows money to pay for those items. And so, you know, just like you wouldn't go out and buy a house cash, probably not, or you know, maybe some of you are. I know that I'm not. I would have to borrow large sums of money to purchase a house or an apartment. So similarly, you know, the city borrows money to either develop housing or pay for parks or any sorts of other large infrastructure projects. And then from Maribel, we have, do any agencies get money from more than one of these buckets? You know, I don't actually believe so. I might be a little bit wrong. One thing that is sort of an interesting quirk of absolutely every single mayoral administration hates showing the fact that their budget might go up. And so what you may have from time to time is the mayoral agency, or like the agency that is the mayoralty, will occasionally spread around their dollars to other people's budgets. And so you'll see, you know, like, you know, you might have an advisor to the mayor going through the Department of Citywide Administrative Services or city planning or the police department. So that's when I say this, I mean truly every mayor. I'm not pointing fingers and singling anyone out. This is Bloomberg, this is de Blasio, this is Adams. You know, I'm sure it goes all the way back to the beginning of time. No mayor is like, oh, my budget's going up, and likes the press that brings. So they all sort of play a little bit of a shell game on that.
We have, I could say we have had staff assigned from other agencies to us.
Yep.
And I don't know if they're, I don't know, like OTI, which is the Office of Technology and Innovation. I don't know if with their general government, but
I think they're general government, but yeah.
So we might have been in the same bucket, but that does happen where an agency, somebody might get assigned somewhere else for a particular reason.
Yeah.
As you just said.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, it's 110, 107 billion dollars. You know, you can and again, it's all sort of made up buckets. And so if you make up a bucket to put something somewhere, you can always move things around. So
well, why don't we move on, and then we can take any questions that pop up.
Exactly. All right, great. Well, I'm going to take that and turn it over to Julia. And Julia, you just let me know when you want me to advance the slide deck. So
Great, you can go to the next one. Thanks. All right, so we are the Independent Budget Office, and we are a nonpartisan city agency, and we provide data-driven fiscal and policy insights into how New York City's government and services operate. So we also provide mandated reports, and those reports are in alignment with major budget actions and answer questions from elected officials and the public. So this could range from reviewing how an agency is spending, it could be analyzing program costs, looking at historical trends, tax burdens, capital financing. And we're going to get into some more about what our mandated reports include and how they might be useful resources in the next slide. But just to show some of the major, not yet, sorry, Logan, one more second. But some of the major budget actions that we have discussed in our last budget cycle for this current fiscal year were things like city headcount or asylum seeker costs, union contracts, the elimination of school safety positions. So there's a lot that we've gotten into in the past, and then we'll get into the next cycle. But before we move on, I just also want to note an important feature of the Independent Budget Office. We do not provide policy recommendations. So we are here to provide information to policymakers and the public to use in the development of policies and programs, but we do not ourselves provide recommendations. And you can go ahead. Thanks, Logan. So we publish 3 annual reports, and these are actually required by the city charter. So Logan mentioned the November plan, the preliminary plan, and the executive plan. And each of these reports is providing our own independent forecast of revenue and expenses for the upcoming fiscal year. So if you hit the next one, Logan, we have revenue projections, and those can include the kinds of things that Logan mentioned, tax revenue like property taxes, personal income taxes, other types of taxable revenue. And we also include those other categories that Logan was pointing out, like miscellaneous revenues. We also make expense adjustments. So we do what we call repricing, but we look at OMB's spending projections, and then we reprice them based on our own information. So it might be based on historical trends, or if we know a new program is going to cost more than OMB is anticipating, we will make those adjustments. And as Logan mentioned, the city is required by law to have a balanced budget for that out year. So we have, and elected officials want to know, they want to know if the money they expect to receive will cover the amount they want to spend. So IBO also calculates an estimation of the gap or surplus. You can go to the next one too. We also take requests for research. So we are thrilled when we hear from council members, assembly members, community boards, and any people in the public. You can request IBO to examine a topic. So for example, in 2022, Councilmember Gail Brewer asked the education team to look into the daily cost of keeping playgrounds at school buildings open during non-school hours for public access. So we did an evaluation and provided that information to the public. And so community boards can also make requests, and we would love to hear from you. You can go to the next, no, just tap it, yeah. Because the last thing that IBO looks at are research questions of interest to the public, and sometimes we come up with those ideas too. So we'll think through what's going on in the city that might be useful. Sometimes there's short visual explainers to help inform people on what a fiscal issue means. We've published short by the numbers on topics like rent stabilization by our former analyst, Alec Goodwin. We had a great recent report by our analysts, Elena Turnquist and Eric Mosier, on the growth of the legal cannabis market in New York City. So we'll do deep dives sometimes based on what we think will be really relevant information for policymakers and the public. And you can go to the next, thanks. So we want to share our resources so that you can learn more about us and we can stay in touch with you. So we have a couple links here and we can drop them in the chat too. We have links to our budget brochures, which give a walkthrough of a lot of the information that we went through today. And you can also sign up to get emails from us every time we publish a new report. And so that's a really great way to stay in touch. Or you can also sign up for our Twitter X page where we'll blast out some information. And then finally, we have fiscal data that's accessible to the public. So we keep data dashboards on COVID spending, historic spending citywide, by agencies all the way back to 1980. We have information on citywide tax revenue, grants, aid. And then also really a crucial thing to check out is we do something called budget options, and we do that yearly. And the purpose of those options are to show different ways that the city could cut costs or increase revenue. And we'll summarize the option. We'll give an estimate of savings or potential revenue, And then because we'll also give arguments for and against its implementation. So examples of that, recently we did a budget option on if we were to repeal the cap on mobile food vendor permits, what could that look like for the city? If we were to create a police liability fund to offset misconduct claim payments, or if we were to ban property owners from charging brokers' fees. So those are some examples of budget options we've done in the past, and we do them every year. So you can keep an eye out for the next year's. And I'm gonna throw in the chat, if they're not already there, some of the links here, because I know you can't click on a PowerPoint, but it's been great and we'd love to hear any questions.
And I think we had one about the library. Yeah, and so when they're talking about that, it's the library systems. So that's NYPL, the New York Public Library, QPL for Queens, and then BPL for Brooklyn. And New York Public Library covers both Bronx, Manhattan, and Staten Island. And then also some of the research libraries. Yes, Talela, that is for all 5 boroughs.
One thing that does come up on occasion, oh, all the lights just went out in my office. I haven't moved very much, I guess, in the last few minutes. Sometimes you might be in your neighborhood, you might be walking down the street, you'll see a bike lane getting installed, or you might see DEP doing some cleaning of gutters and stuff. If you those aren't maybe the best examples, but if you wanted to find out a particular project like that, is that something that you can go into the budget and find, or is that, you mentioned wanting to, so when Councilmember Brewer asked about playground costs like that, you're able to find that? Like, how much detail could a board member find? What's the easiest way to do that if it's possible?
Absolutely. It is really dependent on the agency that is doing the work. Certain agencies, and it also really depends on whether or not we're talking about expense dollars, which we talked about tonight. So, that's really all the things that we were talking about on the debit card or our cash, versus, what we're looking at on the capital side. And capital projects tend to be a little bit more geographically accessible and findable within the budget. And there are a couple of really great resources. I'll actually be able to email them over to Benjamin. But the Department of City Planning has a really great capital project tracker. It's basically a map that shows you where everything is within the capital budget. And then there's also, I really like DCPs. The real OG one is over at the Department of Parks and Recreation. It's a really great capital tracker that shows all of the projects that the Parks Department is doing in everyone's boroughs. And it also gives you details on when those projects are going through design, when they're going to be through construction, and when they're going to be completed. And so if you look for Capital Tracker New York City Parks, that should pop up for you. But I'll definitely make sure that Benjamin ends up with the links to share with you all.
Bernard, I think you have your hand.
Yes,
yeah.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Thank you. Yes, Julia, you really brought up something. You had mentioned something about, I'm again disabled veteran. We had our Veterans Committee meeting last night, and you mentioned the vendor's license. And for veterans, that's a big deal, and a lot's going on with that. And I was wondering if you can expand on that just a little bit, because a lot of veterans are going through that issue. What exactly did you mean by that? You said that
absolutely. So that's a topic that we're very interested in as well, and looking into more right now. So I don't have too much to share out at this moment, but I can say we have people on our team who are really interested in learning more. What we have done is we did a budget option. So that option was looking specifically at the cap on the number of permits. And we were trying to start to think through what it would mean for the city were we to raise the cap or lift the cap on the number of permits that are issued for street vendors. And I think it's a really interesting topic, and it has a lot of different perspectives. there's a lot of nuance that our team is looking into right now. So that's the kind of topic that I'd say sign up for our email list, especially because we will have more information on that in the future. And we're definitely interested in exploring it as well.
A plethora of information. I'm a part of the Street Vendor Project,
Yes, right.
and I'm part of that whole society. So I would like to be in touch with you on that,
Great.
so we can
Yeah.
expand more on that. And the other thing that you mentioned was at the Veterans Committee meeting. Now you said we could contact your office because we're putting a proposal together, and you said we could contact your office to have you research something that we're trying to put together, because there's a lot of homeless veterans on the street. And we're considering trying to come up with something to help veterans who are in the street. You said we can contact your office to help us to come up with something.
Yeah,
We can
so
get your advice.
exactly. And I think we don't give recommendations or advice, but we can provide information. So if you have a
Yeah.
policy topic, exactly. If you're wondering about a policy topic, you're wondering what kind of information is available, you can absolutely contact. The way we're structured, we have different members of IBO who are experts in their specific content or agency or field. So we have a team who's working specifically on street vendors, and you could reach out to them. And I think they've been in touch with the Street Vendor Project too. So that's wonderful to loop in more. But if there's another group that you're part of and you're interested in learning more about what IBO could do to help support and provide information, absolutely. So we can get in touch and follow up and make those connections, because we'd love to do that.
Yeah, I can put this in the chat because it's too much.
Oh,
but
sure.
we put the verbiage together and we know which way we want to go. And when you said that about reaching out to you because of what you guys do, I need to just send to this email or this that you put in the Logan put in the chat.
Well, I'll put my email in the chat as well, because I put in a link to our email list. But if you want to contact us directly, and then we can connect you. Yes.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Were you in the advisory board meeting last night?
Yes, I was.
I thought I recognized the names, but I've seen you 2 nights in a row now.
That was me. Thank you.
All right.
It's wonderful.
Anything else?
And Bernard, I actually managed to look up one of your earlier questions about where the Department of Veteran Services was, and it is in general government. And if you want more information about their budget and specifically, again, just go ahead and reach out to me, and we can put you in touch with the right folks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely. And thank you for your questions.
And we will, of course, be sharing this presentation once we're done with all 4 of these evenings or events. We'll share a video of it online and all the other information with everybody that joined us. Anything else?
Oh, and actually, we'd heard back from our folks on the SNAP question, and so the cost is of connecting folks in the budget, but it's a state program that we get state. It's essentially us connecting folks, but then there's also small administrative costs. And so that's mostly in the state budget that goes through. So not necessarily reflected in our own budget.
Okay, so the actual cost of the food of the SNAP is not in our budget.
Yeah, we help administer the program as a partner of the state who gets federal dollars.
So if we stopped getting SNAP altogether, that our budget would not change.
I don't believe so. No,
that would be a horrible thing, but.
Absolutely. Well, again, I'm not allowed to make policy pronouncements here, but it would certainly be a shock.
Thank you for clarifying that for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yes, the official presentation is over, so we're just taking questions. But if nobody else has any more, going once, going twice, I don't see any hands. You guys are great. Thank you, Maribel.
Oh, thank you. We're huge fans of your work too. So thank you all for coming out on an evening with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. I will send out again. I put in the link about future workshops. And of course, there's a ton of links in there, but we'll share them when I send this out after it's done. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good rest of the evening. Be safe and spend wisely, I guess. I don't know what would be the right sign off.
Thank you.
So
Good
have a
night.
have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.